Hello there. Today we are visiting the Isle of Bute, where we begin at Rothesay Castle, one of the great homes of the House of Stewart. Sitting at the heart of the town, the castle rises from its ancient moat, almost like an island of stone. Its oldest wall forms a great circle, broken by 4 round towers. It is a place where the circle and the fourfold pattern seem to come together. For thousands of years, these forms have carried symbolic meaning. The circle has represented the heavens, eternity, and divine perfection, while the 4 corners of the square have represented the ordered world below. The pattern of 4 appears again and again throughout history. 4 directions, 4 seasons, the 4 elements, the 4 rivers flowing from Eden, and the 4 living creatures surrounding God's throne in the books of Ezekiel and Revelation. In Norse mythology, the heavens were supported by 4 dwarfs, Nordfri, Sudfri, Austri, and Vestri, standing beneath the sky at the north, south, east, and west. In the Prose Edda, the sky itself was formed from the skull of the giant Ymir. At the centre of the castle is an open point with the surrounding circle. In ancient and esoteric symbolism, the single point could represent the origin, the seed or divine spark from which creation expands. Around it, the circle represented the infinite heavens, while the fourfold pattern represented the structured material realm. So was Rothesay Castle built to represent creation? We cannot prove that its builders intended anything of the kind, but viewed symbolically, the comparison is striking. A central point representing the origin, a circular wall suggesting the heavens, 4 towers suggesting the ordered world below, water surrounding and separating the enclosed space from everything beyond it, and within that boundary the seat of the royal authority. Seen in that way, the castle becomes almost like a miniature creation, ordered, enclosed, and separated from the chaos outside. One old and disputed theory suggests that the name Rothesay came from Gaelic words meaning something like the circle and the seat. Whether or not that explanation is correct, it seems fitting for a castle so closely connected with the Stuarts, the royal house that would eventually take its own seat upon the throne of Scotland. Above the north-facing entrance are the worn remains of the Royal Arms of Scotland, described as the earliest surviving Scottish royal arms supported by unicorns. Time, weather, and smoke from a blacksmith's forge have worn away much of the carving, but its message would once have been unmistakable. This was a royal residence. The shield was supported by 2 chained unicorns, symbols of purity, strength, and wild power brought under royal command. The chains were not a sign of Scotland's submission to England. They appeared in the Scottish arms long before the unions of 1603 and 1707. After James VI of Scotland inherited the English throne in 1603, one unicorn was replaced by the crowned Lion of England in the combined royal arms. Rothesay had another curious emblem. On the old seal of the royal borough, the castle stood beneath a crescent and a star, while a ship sailed below. Castle, crescent, star, and ship, representing earth, heaven, and the sea. A pattern of order linking the world below with the heavens above. And as we cross the water and pass beneath the royal crest, we leave the ordinary behind and enter a place of kingship, transformation, and darker history. that darker history begins immediately beneath our feet. Below this entrance passage lies a dark, vaulted dungeon. Tradition says Sir Patrick Lindsay was imprisoned at Rothesay after angering James IV. Patrick was the brother of Lord Lindsay of the Byres. He defended his brother against a charge of treason, and the king was said to be so annoyed that he ordered Patrick to be shut somewhere he could not see his own feet for a year. The surviving gateway may date from a later rebuilding, so we cannot be certain that this was the exact dungeon where he was held. Its position is still striking. Before reaching the open courtyard, every visitor passed directly over darkness. Could that be intentional because James IV was closely associated with alchemical experiments at the Scottish court? In alchemy, the first stage of transformation was called the Negredo, the blackening. It represents darkness, decay, and the breaking down of the old before something new could emerge. So this darkened chamber could be seen as a symbolic image of the Negredo, a place of confinement and darkness beneath the threshold. We cannot prove that this meaning was intended here, but symbolically the journey fits. We cross the moat, pass beneath the royal arms, and enter the castle with darkness directly beneath our feet. Inside the castle, a collection of carved stones has been preserved. Some once formed parts of arches, windows, and decorative features around the royal buildings. One fragment may have belonged to a canopy above a religious statue. Carved into it appears to be part of a hunting horn, reflecting a popular pastime among medieval royalty and the Stuart kings who stayed here. Nearby is the castle well. A well reaches down into the hidden depths of the earth and draws water back towards the light. Viewed symbolically, water was associated with purification, dissolution, and renewal, rising from darkness and bringing life into the centre of the castle. The northwest tower here may have provided accommodation for the High Steward and his family. King Robert III may even have died here in 1406, although other accounts place his death at Dundonald Castle. The upper floor was eventually converted into a ducat, where pigeons were housed, but in alchemical imagery, birds could mean something more. Because they rose from the earth into the air, they were often used to represent the spirit, volatile matter, and the process of sublimation, the raising of a substance from a lower state into a higher one. We cannot prove that any such meaning was intended here, but viewed symbolically, the birds high within the tower suggest ascent and transformation. The main surviving building within the courtyard is St. Michael's Chapel. In the early 16th century, James IV rebuilt the chapel, replacing an older place of worship that had already stood within the castle for centuries. The chapel occupied the upper floor with a cellar beneath it. Inside were a holy water stoup, a piscina where the sacred vessels were washed after Mass, and an aumbry used to store holy items. It was dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel. The name Michael means "who is like God." In the book of Daniel, Michael is described as the great prince who watches over God's people. In the book of Revelation, he leads the armies of heaven against the dragon and casts Satan down from heaven. For medieval Christians, Michael was the great defender of the church, a protector against evil and a guardian of souls. He was often shown carrying a sword or spear, standing over the defeated dragon beneath his feet. He also appears holding a pair of scales, weighing the souls of the dead at the Last Judgment, and sometimes carrying a long trumpet, sounding the final call before Christ's return. His feast day, Michaelmas, was celebrated on the 29th of September and marked one of the great festivals of the medieval year. Not every tradition understood Michael in quite the same way. Some Gnostic writings place him among the heavenly powers involved in the creation of Adam, while Origen describes a Gnostic image in which Michael appeared as a lion. These were not mainstream Christian beliefs, and there is no suggestion that they influenced the chapel here at Rothesay. The dedication here would have carried the familiar medieval themes of protection, judgment, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Behind the chapel, an old flight of stone steps still survives. These steps climb towards the upper levels of the castle. They are sometimes known as the Bloody Stairs, although no one knows for certain how they acquired that name. Leaving the castle behind, we took a short walk through Rothesay, passing the harbour. The first harbour works appeared here in the 18th century, but it was the arrival of steamships in the 19th century that transformed the waterfront. The harbour was rebuilt in 1822 and later extended as Rothesay grew into one of Scotland's most popular seaside resorts. Steamers brought huge numbers of visitors down the Water from Glasgow, turning the town into a busy holiday destination. Beside the harbour stands Rothesay's famous Victorian toilets, opened in 1899 and decorated with polished wood, tiles, marble and gleaming brass fittings. From there we continue along the waterfront and had a look inside St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The present church opened for worship in 1854 during the height of Rothesay's Victorian expansion. It was not formally consecrated until 1862, once the debts from its construction had been cleared and a larger chancel was added later in the century. Its pointed windows and Gothic design deliberately looked back towards the medieval church. Much of the character inside comes from the stained glass of Scottish artist Norman MacDougall. During the early 20th century, MacDougall created several windows here, depicting Saint Margaret, the Vision of Saint John, the Ascension, and Saint Michael, the Archangel. Centuries after the chapel inside Rothesay Castle had fallen silent, the image of its patron saint appeared again here in coloured glass. This is Mount Stuart. The first house here was begun in 1719 by James II Earl of Bute. But in 1877, much of the old house was destroyed by fire. The two outer wings survived and were later incorporated into the enormous Gothic mansion that stands here today. The rebuilding was commissioned by John Patrick Crichton-Stuart, the third Marquess of Bute, and led the Scottish architect Sir Robert Rowand Anderson. John Patrick was a wealthy aristocrat, scholar and deeply committed Roman Catholic, with a fascination for architecture, astrology and the unseen world. At the centre of the new house is the Marble Hall. 12 marble columns rise from the floor towards the great celestial vault above. The official Mount Stuart guide describes 49 constellations and more than 1,000 crystal stars, positioned according to a map of the northern sky. Around them appear the 12 signs of the zodiac. The number 12 is repeated throughout the hall, 12 columns below and 12 signs in the heavens above. But the design was never meant to remain still. As the sun moved across the sky, light passed through the coloured glass and travelled across the marble below. The colours moved from the greens of spring through the warmer oranges and reds of summer and autumn, and finally into the cooler violets and blues of winter. In this way, the passing of the 4 seasons was built into the house itself. John Patrick's friend, the psychical researcher F.W.H. Myers, described blue and green light spreading across the floor, followed by a sudden flash of a crystal star. To Myers, it appeared as though John Patrick had attempted to bring something of heaven down into the centre of his earthly home. The hall becomes the earthly realm, solid, contained and enclosed below, while the signs of the heaven arc above it and appear to move as the sunlight passes across them. The building remains fixed, but the light moves. The earth stands below, while the heavens come alive above it. The marble chapel continues this pattern. Its geometrical floor contains circles representing the 4 traditional elements: fire, air, earth, and water. The elements appear below, while the stars and zodiac fill the heavens above. John Patrick's interest in the heavens was also deeply personal. On the ceiling of his private study, he placed his own horoscope, an image of the heavens at the moment of his birth. He studied astrology, describing it as a curious and fascinating subject. His interests also reached into what Victorians called psychical research. John Patrick became a vice president of the Society of Psychical Research and helped investigate reports of a haunting at Ballechin House in Perthshire. He was also interested in second sight and believed that communication with the dead might sometimes be possible. At his London home, St John's Lodge, a large crystal hung inside his private chapel. Its purpose remains unknown. Perhaps it was used during prayer or meditation, or perhaps John Patrick hoped that it might reveal something normally hidden from sight. For him, astrology and psychical research appear to have formed part of a larger search, an attempt to understand creation, death, and the relationship between the visible and invisible worlds. Myers believed that Mount Stuart expressed this search, a vision of a spiritual city created through stone, marble, crystal, and light. After John Patrick died, his body remained on Bute, but his heart was carried to Jerusalem and buried on the Mount of Olives. At Mount Stuart, he had placed the elements of the earth below and the stars and signs of heaven above, recalling the biblical creation, with the earth below and the lights of heaven set above it. John Patrick's interest in sacred history also carried him far beyond this house. One figure who fascinated him was Saint Magnus of Orkney, a Norse earl remembered as a Christian martyr. Magnus shared the earldom with his cousin Håkon. When rivalry developed between their followers, they agreed to meet peacefully on the island of Rothesay, each bringing only 2 ships. Magnus kept the agreement. Håkon arrived with 8. Magnus offered to leave Orkney forever, accept imprisonment, or even be blinded and mutilated, but Håkon's supporters demanded his death. According to the saga, the man ordered to kill him began to weep. Magnus comforted him, forgave him, and prayed for his soul before kneeling to receive the fatal blow. Medieval accounts claimed that the rocky place where he died became green. Lights and a sweet fragrance were reported around his grave while pilgrims came seeking cures. One man was said to regain the use of a disabled hand. Another was reportedly healed of leprosy after Magnus appeared to him in a dream. A bishop who rejected the growing cult was said to have lost his sight, then recovered it while praying at the grave. Magnus's nephew, Rognvald Kali Colson, later began the construction of St. Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall. Rognvald was eventually ambushed and killed in Caithness. His body was returned to Kirkwall, and tradition claimed that the blood on the stones where he fell remained fresh and visible. He too came to be honoured as a saint. John Patrick travelled to Orkney as a young man and kissed the ground associated with Magnus's death. At Kirkwall Cathedral, he was allowed to examine bones believed to belong to the martyr, but the skull contained an old wound which had begun to heal, suggesting that its owner had survived the injury. After comparing the remains with supposed relics preserved in Prague, he concluded that the Kirkwall bones might belong to Rognvald rather than Magnus. He was also intrigued by a tradition that flowers also grew at the place of Magnus's death. A correspondent claimed to have visited Rothesay after heavy snow and winter gales and found several daisies still in bloom. John Patrick stopped short of declaring this a miracle, but believed it might be a sign of divine favour. His interests were not confined to the distant past. As Provost of Rothesay, he extended the pier, introduced electric lighting, and supported the improvements to public sanitation. While his studies led him towards martyrs, relics, and medieval traditions, his public work remained concerned with the living island beyond Mount Stuart's walls. Mount Stuart may be the grandest expression of Bute's history, but it does not stand apart from the island. Bute grew from a place already shaped by saints, Norse rulers, old kirks, fishing communities, and centuries of change. By the time we leave, the house feels less like an escape from Bute than a concentrated version of it. Beautiful, complicated, and far stranger than it first appears. Thanks for watching this episode of Kirks and Crowns. We'll see you next time.